So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and yeah, Joe Atwill is back. In our last conversation, we said we will have another discussion once the election is over. Um, yeah, it wasn't really surprising to me, but I remember Joe was pretty sure that Kamala would make it, and yeah, so. We are going to have a talk about that. And you said you had some questions about Germany, Joe?
Well, in the US, we get our understanding of the German political situation through our media, which is untrustworthy. So I was hoping you would help me understand it with just a summation of it before we went into my failed predictions concerning the US election.
Yeah, yeah, Trump was pronounced president-elect, and a couple of hours later, the German government collapsed. The chancellor, yeah, he fired the finance minister. And the finance minister had a couple of things that he wanted to change. And because it is not looking good, there are so many companies that are leaving Germany, layoffs by the tens of thousands, companies and corporations going to United States, China, and what have you. And so he wanted to have some big changes. The chancellor said no, he fired him, and now we will have new elections in February. And that is the third European country that has early elections. We had it in Great Britain, we had it in France, and now Germany. And I have a suspicion that there is a plan behind this, but I'm not quite clear what that plan might look like. But I think that is no coincidence. And unfortunately, the guy that will be elected in February as chancellor, if we believe the polls, is somebody that was CEO at BlackRock, Germany. And BlackRock is participating and making a lot of money from three different firms that are producing the Taurus weapon. And this Mr. Merz from CDU, he wants to send the Taurus weapon to Ukraine. And that would make us, as the Russians have said now, a direct partner in the Ukraine war. So it is not looking good. And yeah, that is the German situation. And they are going haywire. They're totally out of control. You
Are
know,
they going to be able to ban the political party? I think it's ADF that is
AfD,
basically
yeah.
anti-immigrant.
AfD, no. The one guy who brought it into the Bundestag, he stepped down and he stepped away from the entire political arena. So we won't hear from him again, I guess. And actually, I don't think it would be successful because if you read their party line that you can read online. There is nothing right-wing extremist in there.
Right.
Absolutely nothing. So that is but you know, it's very similar to the US. Whatever the left-leaning media and yeah, lefties in general don't like is Nazi, fascist, Hitler. I mean, you had it before the
Right.
election.
They use the extreme language. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, here in Germany, it still works.
Sure. It works to some extent in the US, though the Trump victory shows that it's kind of failing a bit here. Well, the German situation is tragic and has been for 100 years. The As I see it, the EU is basically globalist, even though it claims to be European centric. It is in fact global centric, which means that it's part of the process by which European ethnicities can be destroyed and made extinct. And that is, I would say that's the primary goal of the EU, frankly, is to get rid of the ethnic cohorts in Europe because they represented the potential for political power against the oligarchs. I mean, if you think about an isolated person, you know, someone who doesn't have an ethnic identity and support, that person is very, very easy to, well, to destroy, but also to control. And so you have the same problem in Europe that we have in the US, where basically you have globalists, people who would like to have the countries without borders, um, for the purpose of creating, you know, a kind of a clump of individuals that would be easy to control in different ways. Um, Versus the nationalists. People are realizing that they have national interests that are being, um, you know, not respected. And so, you know, in the United States, Trump really did represent nationalism. I think that's the kind of most general description of what he was psychologically to the American people. I mean, I don't trust Trump, and as you know, I've said many times, I think he is controlled himself. But that was the structure of our election. Kamala was, I mean, you know, she is of her background is, you know, Indian, Jamaican, African. Um, she speaks with many different kind of English dialects during the election, and she was made fun of for that. But she was obviously a globalist. You know, there was nothing wrong with the 15 million people who were just brought in without any vetting. And so opposing that was Trump, um, or at least that was how the population saw it. And I was just because, you know, Judith, in order to like either understand or predict the future of our world, um, you have to really use logic more than the narrative that is given to us, you know, because that's so much just a way to control us. And in fact, when you dig into it, it's just a sophisticated kind of fiction and meant to, you know, paralyze our minds. So you need to, you know, use other means of sort of understanding the moment and making predictions about the future based upon it. I looked at the election as I thought it was going to be an extension of January 6th of last presidential cycle. There you had what I perceived as an obvious theatrical event. I mean, there were legitimate protesters, tens of thousands of them, but there were also agent provocateurs who were going to storm the Capitol. The Capitol Police had been notified that these individuals would be permitted to come in. There were a number of skirmishes, but none of them were serious. The final sort of decision in terms of the Capitol Police was just to let the protesters in, and then you had, you know, dozens of individuals wandering the halls of Congress. I mean, some of them were just ridiculous. You know, there was a guy with a buffalo hat on, and but they were in any coherent, you know, description, insurrectionists. They weren't there really to try to seize the U.S. government. I mean, that's just a comical observation. So they were just protesting, and they decided the protest would be the most kind of vigorous if they went in. Some of these individuals who were not aged provocateurs, I think most of them, or a lot of them, were. But anyway, they were just going to wander around, and like one guy sat down in the at the desk of Nancy Pelosi. I think he smoked a cigar, and this was mimicking the seizing of buildings during the 60s and early 70s with the Vietnam War protests, where the protesters would come in and sit down in the desks of the administration chiefs. And so this was kind of what went on. And then that narrative then became a narrative which was that this was an insurrection. And this was levied against basically white males. So they were they would use the misogyny as another characteristic of these individuals. So they were going to make, and did make, the claim that this was an insurrection and that Trump had incited it, even though if you read the text of the speech that he gave, before the protest occurred, it actually had the language of, be peaceful, don't do anything, violent. It was just go there and protest. So somehow that became this meme, which then I thought was used for social control. It was joined with the idea of white supremacy and also Trumpian insurrection, attack against democracy, of fascism, dictatorship. The language, the extreme language that the left uses was all applied. So when I saw this election occurring, and particularly after the Trump's assassination attempt that was, so vivid, and he had blood on his face, and when I analyzed that event, I just thought this was clearly theatrical. I just didn't see it as a real event, and I particularly was suspicious of the fact that, like in a magic act, he disappears, and then he pops up with blood on his face. I mean, the Secret Service surrounds him. He hits the deck. He pops up with blood on his face, and incredibly, in front of the cameras, he has a Secret Service person who is a woman who appears to be like around 5 feet tall, so that Trump's face can be beautifully framed, with the American flag in the background and blood streaming down his face. And I thought this was a theatrical event. What I thought was going on is, and still may occur, of course, I'll get into this, my future predictions in a second, but I thought that they were making Trump into a religious figure, that they were going to try to bind him in a religious and psychological way to sort of the white middle class supporters that he has. So that then when you have had the prior election that just concluded, it would be the same thing except worse than in 2020. In other words, in 2020, Trump at like 11 o'clock Eastern time was clearly the winner. In fact, Fox News had declared him winner, and they have all these computer models that there were still votes to be counted, but there was no way Biden could catch up based on historical data. So Trump was declared the winner, but when you woke up, it turned out it was Biden. And then when you went into kind of analyzing where these votes had come from, it just seemed, statistically implausible. And, there was a very suspicious activity that had been filmed. And so you had this idea that the election had been stolen. So going back to the kind of the method that I use to try to understand reality, I was then use this as logic to try to understand the 2024 election. And when I saw Trump was being established as a religious figure, I said, well, what they're going to do is, logically, is they're going to steal the election, but in a way that's much more vivid than in 2020. In other words, I thought that I was fairly certain that Trump would win the popular vote, for example, but I thought that, in fact, the counting of the votes would be highly suspicious, and that Harris would be given, the victory by, by the media, basically. So this is, and then I thought what would follow would be kind of martial law, because you'd have, at that point, there would be protests, and they would try to have agent provocateurs in different cities, different geographical areas, so they could say, well, this is a national insurrection against the democratically elected president. And then they could have the justification, the pretext for martial law. They could say, we're going to have to lock all this down because the white supremacists are trying to take over the democracy. Now, the white supremacists are really not in a position to take over the country. I'm 75 years old, and I have never met a white supremacist, even though I get around. You think I would meet one occasionally if they're a threat to democracy. But so they use this extreme language for psychological control, and I thought that would be like a really plausible, scenario. But I also mentioned that the other thing that could happen would be they were going to turn Trump into a religious figure, and then, if you understand my position on propaganda, I point out that in this world, you cannot give trust to our political class. You can never trust them, because the political class has been taken over. It has been infested. It has been controlled. They control our understanding of reality, and they use that as propaganda, to control us and move us into situations like World War I or World War II, which are not in our interests, obviously, right? But are in the interests of the oligarchs that want to reduce certain populations. So in general, you cannot trust the political class. You just cannot. And so I do not like the idea of the situation where Trump has been made into a religious figure. And when he had the presidency, he was part of what led to the vaccine mandates, even though they fell mainly in Biden's term. But he started with the what he called Operation Warp Speed to develop the vaccine, which I think was obviously not to our advantage, for all the people to be forced to take it. So now, with Trump being made into a kind of religious figure, and incidentally, they actually had a sort of religious event with Trump immediately, the 2 days, I think, after the election. Dana White, and Joe Rogan, who are independent media personalities and were partially responsible for Trump's victory. Dana White was on the stage with Trump when he claimed victory, and he mentioned Rogan as how powerful he was. Rogan runs this podcast that 80 million people had seen the interview with Trump, and it was one of the things that led to his victory. Anyway, they are White owns, and Rogan is the broadcaster for the UFC, which is, I think, United Fighting Class or something. But it's a vicious and insane martial arts sport, which is has as its like the most different thing than boxing is that the goal is to knock the person to the ground where he's semi-conscious, and then the person who has achieved that will jump on top of him and smash him in the face with hammer blows, and at which point the referee will step in and drag the person off. But it leads to brain damage, and it is a real ratcheting up of like violence and, say, prize fighting, where you would never let a prize fighter get to the point, as the sport is refereed, where an unconscious person is receiving blows. So it really appeals to the most violent, kind of primitive instincts in humans, and it's become our most popular fighting sport in America. So Dana White and Joe Rogan were there at this huge event where the world championship was going to be decided. And lo and behold, Donald Trump shows up, which is just a bizarre kind of situation. But he shows up, has a Masonic handshake with Rogan, and then the fighter who wins, who is a black man, John something, forget his name. I don't follow the sport, but anyway, he is given a belt for winning the world championships. He crawls over the ring, over the ropes, gets in front of Trump and kneels down. He does Trump's little dance that he does, the YMCA dance. Then he jumps over the ropes, gets in front of Trump and gives him the belt and kneels down. And Trump, kind of basically gives him a blessing. I mean, this is really very primitive religious activity.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowd, of course, is just going, just intensely insane. Everyone is just cheering and screaming, and this black man, remember, Kamala is a dark-skinned woman, so this black man comes and gives Trump the belt and kneels down, and Trump kind of blesses him. Well, okay, long-winded here, but my point is, Trump is, to the people who he supposedly represents, he's kind of a religious figure. Now, what I'm saying is this is very dangerous, because that kind of relationship to a leader is incorrect in our world. We've had too many destructive things to the common people occur because the leadership class engaged in what is seemingly insane behavior, but in fact can be determined through analysis as being very cleverly organized behavior to depopulate certain groups. So we can't trust these people. And yet Trump is now a religious figure. I mean, he is literally, just he's unapproachable now. And so I am worried. And I'm afraid that there could be like a war. Certainly a war with Iran is possible. A war with Russia is also possible. The situation in the Ukraine is becoming steadily worse in terms of the kind of weapons that are used. Europe is being put into a more and more desperate situation. I mean, for example, Germany, the impoverishment of Germany is directly related to the cutting off of affordable energy from Russia, right?
Yeah.
The Ukrainian population is being dramatically reduced, and shortly, if they want to continue the war, they're going to have to bring troops in from other countries. Probably first would be Poland, but there are even German troops, though not many, thank heavens. But anyway, you mentioned the Taurus system. I mean, this would directly breach the Russian protocols that they've given, saying that, if you're going to give these weapons, then you are engaged in war against us, and we will exercise the right to, if nothing else, destroy the buildings in which these weapons are being made. Okay. Well, now you have a broadening of the war. Now, the Ukrainian war is kind of interesting, isn't it? In that, I mean, there really is, there's so many ways to have stopped it or prevented it. And certainly the idea that this is good for the Ukraine is just ludicrous, right? I mean, half the population is gone. There's been 1 million casualties. The country has basically been destroyed. For these oblasts, these regions, which were Russian speaking and had historically always had Russian ties, right? So you'd think that some kind of negotiation rather than the current Holocaust of the Ukrainian people could have been achieved, but no. Once again, our political class failed, and the ever-present tool that they use for all issues that they are, involved in, which is to say a depopulating war, was then selected as how they were going to deal with the situation. And here we are. Germany is being economically destroyed. The Ukraine is being physically destroyed. The war is no closer to being resolved. Trump has said he will resolve it. Let's hope he's able to. The facts on the ground are very straightforward. Russia has the better military technology and the better army. So NATO has nothing it can throw against Russia at the moment. There's really nothing. I mean, for the war to be successfully waged by NATO, they're going to have to use nuclear weapons. That's the only possible tool they would have. If they're going to do it, you'd see tactical nukes used at first, small yields, very precise. They would be used against Russian targets. I mean, one scenario that's kind of plausible would be that, well, since the Ukrainian lines are dissolving because they don't have any really fighting men left, they've been killed. The people they have in manning are greatly reduced. They're not trained. They're not motivated. It's easy to imagine a Russian breakthrough, and it would start heading toward Kiev, right? I mean, it would start to encircle Kiev. At this point, it's again now it's plausible that tactical nukes would be used to prevent them, the Russian troops from seizing Kiev. This would be something that I think is, given our political class history, is possible. Russia will respond with their tactical nukes. So now it's just a question of, like, to what extent of depopulation they're have in mind, because they can just blow up all of the cities if they want, at this point. So it's a very difficult time for Europeans,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, it
everywhere in the
is.
world. Trump's victory seems like this is kind of a success for us. I mean, Trump is definitely representing a heritage European America as opposed to the globalists. That's how the dialectic has been set up. Um, I think he's artificial. I don't like the trust that is being given to him. The future is I think very dangerous, and it's all related. The German economic situation, Trump's religious anointing as kind of a man god, the Ukrainian war, the insolvable nature of it. I mean, these things to me all seem to be part of a system, and I don't like where it's heading, Judith. I am worried about the future.
Yeah. There are different points of views on this.
Yeah,
Some say, yeah, they just have to keep you in fear so that you're willing to pay the taxes that
yeah,
allegedly keep you
yeah.
safe. Yeah, that is certainly one approach, but at this particular point, I'm not so sure anymore if it's just talk. And another thing, um, we have some winners, not only Donald Trump, yes, he won the election, but Elon Musk, for instance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he has 21 billion more now since the election. And let's not forget, BlackRock is the biggest shareholder of Tesla. Yeah. And now BlackRock also invested in Bitcoin. And they are the biggest shareholders of these IT companies, NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft.
They
So
also own
they,
about 80% of our real estate in the United States. They've been buying
yeah,
up all of the residential
yeah,
properties for over a decade, and are basically driving all of Americans into being a renter class of people.
yeah. And then we had a little infight at the WEF, and Klaus Schwab lost it. He was accused of racial and sexual misconduct. And now the tide has shifted to Larry Fink. And, and Larry Fink is CEO of
Yeah,
BlackRock.
yeah.
So, and if now you think there might be a worldwide takeover, of course, you are a conspiracy theorist and you're a nut job. This is all coincidental. And I could also imagine that, especially with BlackRock now investing in Bitcoin and so forth, that and Elon Musk has his own cryptocurrency. I could imagine that under Trump there will be the first steps for a CBDC. He said he is against it, I know, but it's you just have to sell it right. You in the very beginning, you can make it, let's say, yeah, we make it like Bitcoin. It is not with a central bank, and then later on, the central bank scoops it up.
Sure. Once it's
Or,
existing in common use, the central banks need to get control over it. Yeah.
yeah. And what you also could do is, let's say, government payments like retirement money or whatever, or that will be only electronically, or additionally, you could tax cash, meaning you go to the supermarket, you pay. If you pay electronically, you pay the price. You pay with cash, you have to pay more. You know what I mean?
Sure, of course. And then there's also the social credit score,
Yeah.
where if you've engaged in bad conversations publicly, then they can demerit your checking account. You
Mm.
know, um, I don't want to kind of I could give you personal kind of examples of if you're someone who speaks out, they do have you on lists and things, and you have to be aware that you're just going to have to deal with certain kinds of government activity against you, or restrictions, that normal people don't have to put up with. Fortunately, to date, they haven't really gone draconian with this, but it's out there. And the social credit score would just be, they could then, I mean, just think of all of the different categories that they could create, to take money away, anti Semitism, uh, 911 truther, misogynist. I mean, they could just go right down the list and come up with basically the ideal mindset of what they would call a citizen, but would in fact be a puppet. And they could just control it through these electronic financial methods, and it's obviously something that we have to resist. And it's kind of, you mentioned Musk. I mean, fascism is when the government and the oligarchs are basically unified. And
Yeah.
so when you see Trump and Musk, this is not a marriage made in democratic heaven. This is very dangerous, and Musk is now taking over basically the rocket science of the United States. He's the one who now puts up the satellites, and I think you're going to see in this coming, as Trump rolls out his programs, the Musk technology will be basically the arm of the government in many, many areas. And I don't think that this is wholesome. I think it ends up in a very dangerous place. So the citizen is purportedly being given more freedom. I mean, Musk, it's he took over Twitter because and named it X because there was censorship. So Musk is the voice of citizen freedom, right? Um, and it just is a curious event that he ends up being, such a close friend of the God man Trump. But in fact, those who have sort of historical principles by which we understand reality are just very horrified of this relationship and are very mistrusting of Trump. And I would say if you look at Trump's background, particularly his mother, you can see the Masonic, elements. I mean, she dresses up as Egyptian goddesses, and she has just a very, very bizarre background. And I think it's pretty clear that there is some kind of secret society control, that Musk is part of. He's sort of an artificial character. There's no particular reason for him to be wealthy. He doesn't have any technologic skills. He can't program a computer. He didn't create Tesla, the automobile company. He just somehow had the money to do it. His money comes from PayPal, which one would wonder could possibly give him these billions of dollars. It's such a crummy service. Musk is this mysterious, to me, multi-billionaire. And I think he's artificially created. And I'll give you examples of who are, one of these characters would be George Soros. I mean, Soros was a a clerk working for the Rothschilds in one of their banks, and then somehow became a genius, able to predict the interest rates, of the British pound, and he just made a fortune. But he always had Rothschilds on his board of directors, which is bizarre. I mean, how would this clerk end up with this relationship? But he did. And then you have like Bill Gates. Gates is another person who, became sort of a computer software superstar, made billions, but he couldn't program. I mean, he knew how to code a little bit, but he was not a programmer. He didn't even write the original operating system, DOS, that IBM bought from Gates and then put on their personal computer, which was the worst business decision in history, right? I mean, why would IBM, who had thousands of operating system programmers, why would they pick someone who didn't have any capacity to code as the individual who would then be in control of the operating system of their personal computer, which everyone knew was going to be one of the biggest products in history? Why would they do this? It just makes no sense whatsoever. And I know a lot about this because actually I was one of the owners of a company that really could have been the correct company for IBM to have selected, because we had really successful operating system programmers in our company, and we worked on IBM machines. And when Gates was given the ability, his company was given the ability to put DOS in the IBM computers, we thought that there had to have been some kind of payola. I mean, it was just so bizarre to us that this individual with no technical skills, that IBM would turn to him. And at the time, I didn't understand the world, and I just thought that there had to have been some kind of underhanded method, which was really surprising because IBM was so careful about that. I mean, and I know about this world because our company, we were one of the few companies that had access to the IBM microfiche of their operating system. The kind of products we put out were involved in the operating system. They weren't applications, they were operating system software. So we had this microfiche given to us. And I can tell you that the process by which you had access to the IBM operating system would be something like, nuclear bomb security. I mean, you were under so much scrutiny. Their operating system was so guarded. The idea that they would let some kid who dropped out of Harvard, it was just ridiculous. It's when you look into Gates's background, you look into his father and his mother. His mother is Phillips. She was one of the Federal Reserve families. Her family actually owned because the Federal Reserve at one point set up a kind of localized regional banks. Her family owned the Seattle Federal Reserve aspect bank, and his father was this. He was the head of Planned Parenthood, which had always been an oligarch endeavor, and a depopulating endeavor. And he was very close friends. There are actually pictures of him with David Rockefeller and Kissinger and Soros. So this group, this is how Gates was selected. He was selected because he came from a family and certainly had been trained in the secret society protocol from the time he was a young man. And then he was ready to be presented to the world as this hip kind of alternative to IBM. I mean, in other words, if you think about what they were trying to do, is they're trying to get the iPhone in the pocket of the baby boomer, basically. So you couldn't bring it through IBM, and they brought it through hip, people of their own generation, like Gates and Jobs. And then we weren't as suspicious of it as being a tool, that we could be controlled with. So now, when people sit there and get their information through the iPhone, they've been, subjected to this long process, which was always controlled by the oligarchs. And fortunately, it's a double-edged sword, and it has created citizens media. I mean, it was an inevitable and impossible to avoid phenomena. They're trying to control that now with the algorithms. If you look at, you try to use Google or any of the search engines, you'll see that there is a very strong control of what you can actually access. And you can see what the future is with this. The more you use this device for your information, the more control you'll be subjected to, the narrower and narrower. But humans being what we are, we're hard to control, and you have kind of critics and very talented people pop up who are opposed to this and understand it. And so we're at this moment that's just amazing in its, kind of its momentous, uh, control for our future. We're either going to have a real citizens media that is in opposition to the control that they're trying to exert through the personal computers and the iPhones and computer technology, or we won't, and we will just become part of their mechanical world, and we will eventually be replaced by robots, or Elon Musk will succeed in his Neuralink technology, and so then we can just be perfectly chipped. And Judith, I mean, if you really want to see what they have in mind, just read Brave New World. With the intellectual stratification, the controllers, and the state in charge of all education. And the particularly important aspect is the intellectual stratification. I mean, will be different levels of what is permitted, in terms of the working class, none of which will be able to be smart enough to challenge the oligarchs. And when you see the degree of autistic children, what I would say is you're actually looking at the onset of the Delta and Epsilon class.
Mm-hmm.
Here in California, it's hard to believe, but 1 in 22 children are going to be able to to register on the autistic scale, which means that they are severely, to use an expression, retarded in terms of intellectual potential, right? And then it also, what is not mentioned, is the fact that if 1 in 22 are autistic, that the other 21 will also be subjected to some of this influence and will have moved to the bad side of the IQ curve. So we're being dumbed down. You're seeing the delta and epsilons are vivid, but you're also seeing, the beta class being developed too. And so, this is our world. They have seized control of the political class. They are in control of the technology, and they have a future which it will be the Brave New World, where the controllers are in a kind of ossified situation where their power cannot be contested, because biologically they will have created, what they call order, meaning we're slaves and they're, have power. So this is kind of the entire world is in this process. It's everything that we've discussed, the German economic situation, the impossible to extinguish irrational war in the Ukraine, Trump's seeming, kind of like deification into a man god status. All of these things, they seem disparate, but if you have the right kind of mindset or clarity, you can see that actually they're all part of it. And so I always, whenever I'm on these things, I'm talking to you, I always mention that, you're so noble in just putting on, different opinions, trying to get people to be aware of different ideas, bringing all the different people, different ideas, and you should be supported. I hope that people who listen to our conversations will support you financially, as well as, with sharing, your feeds with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah, who doesn't? Yeah, yeah.
I have a little bit support on Patreon. Yeah.
Yeah, you deserve it. Yeah, yeah.
And But I have to say, I'm really happy that as it looks now, it didn't come to, real uprisings or something that would develop into a civil war. But that doesn't mean we haven't seen insane meltdowns. And I'm flabbergasted what is going on out there. Now the women going for 4B, yeah, no date, no marriage, no kids,
Yeah.
all men, they are shunning all men, whether they voted for Trump or not. And then what I found extremely disturbing was this um, Aqua Tofana movement. Have you heard of it? Aqua
Yeah,
Tofana.
explain that to me. What is that actually?
Aqua Tofana is a poison that was used in
Right, right.
Italy.
It's an ancient poison, yeah, that they in the Middle Ages they used to kill husbands with. Yeah,
Exactly. And so
yeah,
there are numerous videos out there. And then one woman said, yeah. So if your husband voted for Trump, then you have to divorce him. If you cannot divorce him for whatever reason, aqua tofana.
yeah.
Aqua
I mean,
tofana, look it up.
I
Not saying what to do with it,
yeah,
just look it up. I mean, seriously, you are
yeah.
willing to kill somebody over a politician?
Yeah, the difference between Trump and Harris, in fact, is so small, even though they have dramatically different political personas. I mean, if you think about, well, are they actually going to get rid of the Federal Reserve Bank? I mean, would they change the position against Masonic Zionism that the nation has? I mean, in other words, there's kind of window dressing, but in fact, there's just so much that they share that you wouldn't think that the suggestion of murdering your husband would be, something that would ever come to someone's mind. But obviously, we're being taken. I mean, one of the things that's being broken is our sanity, and when you see the reaction of like Harris's supporters who lost, who became hysterical. I mean, that's not something that occurred in like Kennedy, Nixon, or any of the political races. Prior, people are being taken into these extreme kind of, and it has a lot to do with identity politics. They identify like with women or with people of color, and they're always in general aimed against kind of heritage European political power. Um, that's really the target. And so they use these identity concepts as, which is all part of critical theory. I mean, when you see someone like that who's that crazy, you can really fairly easily trace the sort of intellectual process by which such a mind came into existence. And it has a lot to do, of course, with cultural Marxism and critical theory, wherein every aspect of European culture was criticized.
Mm.
And they would hold up ideals and as our own ideals as demonstrating that we are in contradiction with them, and therefore our culture needs to be destroyed. Never applying sort of the normal uh, idea that you would want to have overlapping kinds of powers wherein yeah, marriage is bad sometimes, but it doesn't always have to be terrible. And so instead of any kind of like real process of honest criticism, it was just given as sophistry for psychological um, power over heritage Americans and heritage Europeans, um, where people would hate themselves. Critical theory ends up with self-loathing, and then you're easy to control, and the poor victims, of like the Harris hysteria, of the people who lost, who were in favor of Harris and then became hysterical. I mean, they're just an example of this process. They are They are the sum total of all of the background of critical theory that leads to insanity. You know, it's obviously, they are certainly insane. I mean, there's no question, you know, because they're so physically you know, involved with their emotion. You know, they can't control it. It's just overwhelming. You know, some of the examples I've seen. So that's a component of irrationality, which is easy for the oligarchs to control, and then they set up this intense dialectic where the people, we fight against ourselves, right? We're always being like in this gladiatorial pitch, you know, and you know, you see these like young women who are hating men, and you wonder, well, have you considered that we've been led into this gladiatorial pit, and that really we should be thinking of how we got here before we start to kill each other? You know, before we start attacking one another, even though we have this like evolutionary propensity to support one another and be a society that is actually nurturing to each other. Somehow here we are in the gladiatorial pit, and you want to kill me with your poison because I voted for Trump. You know, I mean, how did we get here to this point where the supportive relationship between men and women has been used, you know, has been put into this dialectic where now we're in competition, and we have to have different political parties. You know, so it's, you know, it's once they were able to get us to move to, you know, into this control by the media, they were been able to step by step to break apart, you know, the things in our society which were supportive and kept us strong, you know. And so I am hopeful that this moment where Trump is being set up as a man god can also be used as a moment that we can kind of restore the connections, at least in terms of like heritage Europeans, and to start to see ourselves in not in a dialectic, you know, but because the thing that I'm trying to say is that we need to energize kind of the power that connects us, because we have been subjected for so long, so many generations, to sophistry and psychological maneuvers to separate us. Their goal is to create isolated humans, males who are only interested in pornography, and women who are interested in isolating themselves from male and having their own economic destinies. Um, well, none of this works. You know, you can see it when people get older that, you know, it's just not we're not designed for this. We are designed to live together and in support of one another. We need each other very
Yeah.
much, you know, in order to be sane. Men and women need each other, and we need to have the kind of awareness that we need each other. So um, I'm, you know, there is, you know, kind of there are clarifications that are occurring. You know, I mean, there's so many more Europeans, but that are now aware of what they've been attacked by, and it's just, I'm hopeful that the citizens media, you know, you and the others like you, can really keep giving, you know, to everyone, you know, because it's not just the Europeans. I mean, in our country, the African Americans have been attacked probably more viciously than any other group, right? We've all been attacked, but certainly, you know, we could do a show on it sometime, just how specifically they destroyed African American culture in America. And I'm not talking about slavery. I'm talking about there had been an uptick in culture in every aspect of African American culture, from the Civil War to like the early 1960s. Everything was moving correctly. All demographic statistics, violence, out of wedlock births, education level, financial, all of these things were going in the right direction. And then the so-called Great Society program came. And the Great Society program had as its one powerful tool that only women who lived apart from men would receive the welfare check.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the Great Society program. And then all of the demographic statistics did a U-turn. And what they were able to do is to create a debased culture with which they could then dump all of the white youth into to try to have that culture like influence them. So you would start to have more out of wedlock births, reduced education level. I mean, the all of the negative statistics of the African American community that was attacked in the 60s now are being followed and traced by the European Americans. Everyone, they're heading down in exactly the same way. So anyway, it's and of course you have the CIA, the influence of the CIA with crack cocaine, getting that into the inner city just to accelerate the process by which the families would be destroyed, and all of the progress would be reversed. You see, so that's what they've done, and so
You're breaking up. I don't hear you anymore.
it's really all ethnicities, that.
Okay, you broke up a little bit, but
Oh, I'm sorry, Drew.
it doesn't matter. So, what do you think now? Allegedly, it was Joe Biden who allowed Ukraine to use long-range weapons.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's Joe Biden is not he's really
Yeah.
there are recent videos of him. He's almost senile. So
Yeah.
obviously there's a group that controls him. Um, the deep state. There's different words for it. No one knows who's actually running at this point, Judith. No one is being given public information concerning who's running the United States. No one, absolutely no one. We know that Biden gave the Ukraine the go-ahead to use the ATACMS missiles so they could attack deep in Russia, right? Which can only accelerate, this process of World War III. And so we're just in a very dangerous situation where you have the neocons in control. I think that's a good term to use of who's controlling the foreign policy of the United States right now, and there's no individual who's responsible for it. So between now and when Trump's elected, they could easily try to use this moment to make the war more intense, to have the Taurus system can be given to the Ukraine. They have attack and missiles that the U.S. has available that can get even deeper into Russia. I mean, I'm not sure how far Moscow is, but it's not that far. It's only a few hundred miles, easily within the range of a
The
lot of the
Taurus
missiles.
can reach Moscow.
Yeah, so there it is. Okay, so there you go. So you blow up a few buildings in Moscow, and how would Russia respond? And by the time Trump comes to office, you could actually have World War III well in motion. And now, what do you do?
Yeah, but the Taurus, we will have our election in February. That
Yeah.
means the new government does not come in before March. So, but then Donald Trump is already in office, and we will see. I don't believe that he will put it to rest in the first 24 hours.
No,
I don't, that is ridiculous. But we
no.
will see how he will behave then.
Yeah. Well, we'll see pretty quickly. I mean, the first question is what condition will he inherit?
Yeah.
Because it could be quite a bit different than the current one. I mean, currently the war is coming to an end because Russia is winning, and then if the war reaches a natural conclusion, it'll be over certainly in 3 or 4 months. Because when you hit winter, the Ukraine won't really have the physical ability to defend itself, and that'll be the end of the war. It'll end by the war being won. However, if NATO decides that the war should continue, and they put their own troops in or different kinds of weapon systems, this will intensify the war, not end it, and that'll be so Trump will inherit one or the other, kind of environment. It would be great if the war could end. I mean, it should end right now, obviously, but since I've always thought the war was artificial, I thought the war was just for the purpose of depopulation. There's no reason for them to end it. There's fact, if their goal is to reduce the European population, they have every reason right now to continue the war. and to broaden the war, and to bring in Polish troops, and to bring in German troops, and to bring in the Taurus missile system and the long-range ATACMS, and maybe even some U.S. boots on the ground. And they can just start slaughtering on even larger scale European, I mean, the thing that is, should really be the headline every day is just that more Europeans are slaughtered. More Europeans are slaughtered. More Europeans are slaughtered. They have divided us, across all these lines, but we should look at the Ukrainians as, sharing, humanity with us, and ask the politicians, demand the politician that the war is ended. There is no military system available for the Ukraine to prevent Russia from taking control of the Russian-speaking oblasts. So let them have it and end the war right now.
Yeah,
and of course, the same thing can be said about Palestine.
Yeah.
I mean, why is that continuing?
There was a survey among Ukrainians. 63% want peace negotiations right now.
Yeah,
even if it means to give up territory.
Of course. Look, in European war, there's always territory that's won or lost. It's just normal. And these are the 63% of the Ukrainians who stayed. What do you think if they took a poll of the Ukrainians that had left? What do you think their result would be if they were asked that question? Be 90%. They would say, like, just end the damn war. So the Ukrainian people want to end it, but they have Zelensky, a Jewish oligarch-funded individual who has political power. Well, that's just not a good formula for the Europeans,
Yeah.
I mean, what is his motivation to stop the war? What is his goal for the war? So
plus we go full circle, because BlackRock will handle the restructuring.
Of course. Yeah.
And the more it is destroyed, the more money BlackRock.
Right. It's another BlackRock real estate deal. And so in the macro level, it's just evil beyond anything imaginable. But the details of the evil need to be more clearly understood by the European populations. We just have to get more information out. And so it's on your shoulders, Judith. Good luck.
And no pressure here.
No pressure on you, right? So I have to go.
Okay,
it's been a great pleasure talking. Why don't we talk again in certainly we should talk before the Trump's, comes to office. But there are other subjects. I really want to have one show which I get to interview you about Germany. Because there's so much misunderstanding about the German and European situation in general. Americans are it's so hard for us to get good information. I'd love to have a show like that where I was able to ask you a bunch of really dumb American questions that you could clarify, so we'd get that information out to us.
Okay, we will.
All right, Judith, thank you so much.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.